I'm Gloria Duffy, as he mentioned, President and CEO of the club, and I am just delighted to be the moderator for this evening. As you know, you can find the Commonwealth Club online at commonwealthclub.org, on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and so forth and so on. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce today's distinguished speaker, Mike Rich, and his very interesting topic. Michael Rich is President and CEO of the RAND Corporation. RAND is a nonprofit, nonpartisan research organization headquartered in Santa Monica, but with offices in Washington and a number of other cities, that seeks to improve public policy and decision-making through research and analysis. For more than 40 years, Mike Rich has helped RAND become a leading source of expertise and evidence-based ideas in an increasingly complex and polarized policy-making environment. Mike Rich began his career at RAND as a summer intern in 1975, joined the organization full-time as a researcher focused on national security issues the following year. He has held a variety of positions in the senior leadership of RAND, created a number of new programs and projects at RAND, helped lead RAND's diversification and expansion into international markets, including the establishment of RAND Europe, the RAND Qatar Policy Institute, and RAND Australia. He became president and CEO of the organization in 2011. He's been an enthusiastic supporter of the Pardee RAND Graduate School, which is the world's largest PhD program in policy analysis. He has taught there, advised graduate students, and chaired numerous committees. Mike was trained as an attorney. He has his JD from UCLA and his BA from the University of California, Berkeley, right across the bay. He serves on many boards of outside nonprofits and organizations, including the Council for Aid to Education, the International Institute for Strategic Studies, the Los Angeles World Affairs Council, Wise and Healthy Aging, the Every Child Foundation, Santa Monica UCLA Medical Center and Orthopedic Hospital, and the UCLA Foundation. He's a member of the U.S. Defense Science Board, the Council on Foreign Relations, and the California Bar. When RAND says their analysis is objective and rigorous, that it is indeed, steeped in history, data, and analysis. In keeping with the spirit of RAND being nonpartisan, conservative commentator George Will devoted a column to the report that we'll be discussing tonight, which is called Truth Decay. And former President Barack Obama also put RAND's report on his list of summer reading because he thought it was so important. So there's true nonpartisanship. The topic that we're going to be discussing tonight, of the diminishing role of facts and analysis in American public life, is obviously important to RAND, whose role is to analyze data and recommend policy approaches that are grounded in good data. This trend is also important to the Commonwealth Club, which brings facts and the analysis of facts to public light. The club's two early mottos were, "Get the facts," and "Find truth and set it loose in the world." Truth and facts becoming more elusive certainly affects the club's work and probably makes our work more important, just as it does the work of RAND. So it is my great pleasure to introduce RAND's president and CEO, and not to mention my esteemed former colleague, Michael Rich.
Thank you, Gloria. Well, that was a great, generous introduction. Thank you, Gloria. Gloria and I have known each other now, I hate to say it, Gloria, 40 years. More than 40 years, actually. I really appreciate, Gloria, you inviting me back to the Commonwealth Club, and this is my first time, however, at your wonderful new home. Congratulations. I've been a long-time admirer of this organization. Gloria mentioned I'm a graduate of Cal, attended programs while I was a student. I think it represents the best traditions of American civil society, a club open to everyone. I was intrigued when I learned about the latest motto of the club, "Find the truth and turn it loose in the world," because of my topic tonight, which is truth decay. And Gloria told you what we mean by that. I'm going to say a bit more, but essentially it's the diminishing role of facts and analysis in American public life. And I thought I'd start with a couple of puzzles at the beginning. According to official Justice Department statistics, violent crime in America has been declining since 1993. At first, public attitudes tracked those trends. That is, opinion surveys showed that people stated that they believed that crime was falling. But in the year 2000, public opinion parted company from the facts. Violent crime rates have continued to fall since that time, but more and more people say that crime is rising. Here's another one. Over the last 2 decades, the scientific evidence about the safety and the benefits of childhood vaccines has gotten stronger, actually much stronger. That's the conclusion of research from the National Institute of Medicine, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, as well as by RAND. Yet over the same period, the public's belief in the safety of childhood vaccines has declined, markedly, in fact. The decline is not explained by party affiliation. It's not explained by ideological viewpoint. It's not a Democratic phenomenon or a Republican phenomenon. It transcends the political divide. So what's going on here? We've been following trends like this at the RAND Corporation now for many years, and they're growing noticeably worse. And as a result, I've come to believe that truth decay is a grave threat to our democracy, possibly even an existential threat. So I'm grateful for the chance to tell you about the research we've been doing at RAND to get a grip on this phenomenon. What we mean by truth decay, what we've learned about it so far, and how we see the way forward. So what do we mean by truth decay? We've defined it as 4 interrelated trends, and I'll go through each one briefly. The first trend is the increasing disagreement about facts and analytical interpretations of data. So the safety of vaccines, what's happening with violent crime rates, those are examples. The second trend is a blurring of the line between fact and opinion. You can see this when you watch any so-called all-news program. They're not all news. It's happening with newspapers too. Features that mix reporting and interpretation in the same story are often interspersed among straight news. You can see it in the careers of journalists these days. Most news reporters also blog, tweet, post, opine on television and radio. All of these changes have helped to blur the distinction between fact and opinion. The third trend is the vast increase in the quantity of opinion relative to fact, and therefore its influence. So take TV news. When I was growing up, there was an hour of national news on television each day. When news channels began broadcasting 24 hours a day, believe me, there was not a 24-fold increase in the number of facts that were gathered and reported. Most of the extra time was filled with opinions, repetition of opinions, and ultimately opinions about opinions. The same thing has happened with newspapers. When newspapers went online, no newsprint to buy, essentially infinite space to fill, they discovered that opinion pieces cost far less to produce than reported stories. In fact, most op-ed writers don't get paid at all anymore. Newspapers discovered that some opinion pieces attracted more online clicks than reported stories. And then came the blog, and of course came interactive social media platforms like Facebook and Reddit and Twitter, where opinions really dominate. The fourth trend we've identified is the loss of trust in institutions that have traditionally been sources of factual information, especially the government and the media. The percentage of people who express either a great deal of confidence or a lot of confidence in Congress reached an all-time low in 2016, 9%. Rebounded last year to 12%. Now, those are aggregate percentages. among some groups of people, the level of confidence in Congress even lower. Trust in newspapers isn't quite so low, but it's fallen as well. Now, our book has lots of data on these trends if you're interested, but what we found was that the four trends reinforce each other. And as a result, people are increasingly unable to determine what is a fact and what is not. Some people don't even know where to turn to find reliable factual information when they need it. And here's what makes the problem, I think, even more dangerous. Truth decay is not limited to any one region of the country. It's not limited to one demographic, one political party, or one politician. It is much more pervasive than that. It is truly a systemic problem. So what's causing truth decay? The first cause is human nature. Humans are hardwired with cognitive biases in the way we process information. Confirmation bias leads people to hold on to prior beliefs, even when they're presented with information that clearly shows that these beliefs are erroneous or misguided. There's also the natural tendency of people to search for information that is consistent with their personal experiences or beliefs. Psychologists call this motivated reasoning. Cognitive biases have contributed to many of America's greatest failures in its history. Before Pearl Harbor, the United States military failed to heed multiple warning signs that the Japanese were planning to attack. In fact, a RAND scholar by the name of Roberta Wallstetter unpacked the biases that led to this failure in a landmark study. Unfortunately, the cognitive biases that Roberta uncovered and explained in that book are not at all unusual. Before the Great Depression, policymakers overlooked signs that stock market speculation was way out of control. And if you've read the book The Big Short and other sources, you know that there was ample warning before the 2008 financial crisis as well. Anything that makes inconvenient facts easier for people to ignore or to miss is problematic, and cognitive bias does that. So cause number one, essentially human nature. That doesn't really get us very far in explaining what's happening today. Human nature, of course, hasn't changed, but truth decay has definitely gotten worse over the last 20 years. We believe the second cause is the enormous transformation in the information landscape that everyone, of course, is familiar with. The change in the economics of journalism that I described earlier, the internet's two-sided effects on access to information. On the one hand, it's opened up vast quantities of new information to billions of people. But on the other hand, it's also made it easier to spread the wrong kinds of information. Recent research from MIT indicates that erroneous information spreads even faster on the web than facts. And of course, the internet has also given each of us the ability to narrowly tailor our information sources, thereby reinforcing our cognitive biases. The third cause we found was the inability of the American education system to keep up with these changes. The nation's fallen behind in teaching the skills that citizens need to distinguish good information from bad. Too many Americans can't separate facts from falsehood or critically evaluate different sources of information. They can't distinguish sound statistics from statistics designed to mislead. And finally, there's the sharp rise in polarization. And here I'm talking not just about polarization in politics, but also in society and the economy. And these divides are self-reinforcing. You are far more likely than your parents to live alongside people who think much as you do. You're much more likely to consume news and information that supports what you already believe. You're more likely even to marry a person with the same political and social preferences. The more our society splinters into like-minded groups, the easier it is for echo chambers to form and thrive and persist. So you may be asking how much of this truth decay is actually new. Haven't politicians always been masters of spin? And of course, there's that old saw, a lie can travel around the world before truth can get its pants on. That line's been around in various forms since the 1820s. So haven't there been periods like this before? Well, the answer to that is sort of yes, but also sort of no. There have been at least 3 periods in American history that were similar to today. The 1880s and 1890s, a period when income inequality and populism were on the rise also. And that's when, of course, yellow journalism flourished. Then there was the 1920s and the 1930s when radio completely upended the information landscape. And again in the late 1960s, early 1970s. The era of Watergate and the Vietnam War was a period of deep distrust in government and other institutions. Those 3 periods were actually quite similar to today, but they were not as dangerous. What we didn't see in any of those earlier periods was the growing disagreement about facts and analytical findings. And we've wondered why not. And possibly the information environment, the recent changes in the speed and scope of the information flow, unprecedented. And plus there are more sophisticated disinformation techniques today. Russian attempts to spread disinformation among Americans, what the Russians call active measures, have made ample use of these more sophisticated tools and the platform that social media provides. There's a substantial body of evidence that the Kremlin has been sponsoring efforts to subvert American democracy by promoting distrust of American institutions. They've done the very same thing in Europe, attempting to alienate citizens from their government and drive a wedge between the United States and its allies. Of course, Russia is only one of many actors that uses disinformation to achieve political, economic, or other goals. China, North Korea, Iran engage in these activities as well. And of course, there are domestic actors who do it as well. Some lobbyists, for example, use misinformation and misleading information. The evidence we have suggests that disinformation might not change people's pre-existing beliefs. It's actually really hard to get people to change their views once they've made up their minds. But it may influence how people form their opinions in the first place. And there's ample reason to believe that, or suspect, that truth decay could even get worse before it gets better. One reason is the advent of the technologies of audio and video mimicry. These techniques are driven by artificial intelligence, which of course is advancing at a quickening pace, so the fakes are getting better and better. The mimicry is not perfect yet, but scientists say it will soon almost be impossible to tell real audio and video apart from what they're calling deep fakes, at least not without sophisticated technologies, plenty of resources, and enough time, which of course social media doesn't allow. What will happen when most people can't distinguish a real clip of their president from a fabricated clip? In my judgment, today's strain of truth decay is already especially worrisome. For one thing, it erodes civil discourse, the ability to have a meaningful debate with people with whom you disagree. The erosion of civil discourse in turn drives political dysfunction and paralysis. And government dysfunction has serious economic consequences. You think about the inability to compromise that led to the government shutdown, federal government shutdown in 2013. Estimates vary, but most suggested that the shutdown cut at least 0.25 percentage point, in some cases perhaps as much as 0.5 point from real GDP growth. Without civil discourse tackling the nation's most serious and chronic problems, virtually impossible. Think about the dysfunction that prevents Congress from stabilizing the Social Security Trust Fund. Nowadays, no major policy problem can be solved in the span of a 4-year presidency, much less a 2-year Congress. It's just not enough time to reform an entitlement program or plan and execute a major infrastructure project, or for that matter, defeat an insurgency. Solving complicated problems like these requires compromise, consensus over long periods of time, and that's impossible if different factions can't agree on a single set of facts. And as the legendary Senator Moynihan said, everyone, of course, is entitled to his own opinion, but not his own facts. The more that government can't get important things done, the more that public trust in government erodes. And diminishing trust in turn leads to individual citizens disengaging and becoming alienated from the political process. And to give you just one especially stark example, in Dallas, just the nation's ninth largest city. The last time there was an election for mayor, the turnout rate among registered voters was below 7%. Among eligible voters younger than 35, it was below 2%. It's not a good indicator for the future when young people are the most disengaged of all. And it isn't just the alarmingly small percentage of people who exercise their right to vote, or the worrisome number of demographic groups who feel left out of the political process. It's the people who say their vote doesn't matter. They withdraw from civic life, they stop behaving like responsible citizens and start behaving like bystanders. And that's why I think truth decay might be an existential threat to our democracy. Well, what then must be done? Well, that's exactly what we're working on at RAND. And here's what I can tell you so far. Truth decay is unlikely to correct itself. To reverse it, Americans are going to have to make concerted, well-thought-out efforts to sustain them over a long period of time. And to inform these efforts, we've launched a series of new initiatives to get a more granular understanding of what exactly is going on and what might be effective in combating it. On media, we're using textual analysis software and machine learning we typically use in our intelligence community work to analyze in detail how the presentation of news has changed since the 1980s. On trust, we're conducting a detailed survey about the characteristics that make institutions more trustworthy or less trustworthy in the public's eye. We're searching for clues about exactly what institutions can and must do to regain public trust and then retain it. On literacy, we're working on how to evaluate the media literacy programs that are being developed around the country. I was surprised to learn there's no standard for evaluating what kinds of instruction work and what kinds don't. And so we're developing a framework for measuring the effects of these media literacy programs. That's going to be essential if society decides to scale up programs that will improve people's ability to navigate the information landscape of the future. What's clear so far is there's not going to be a simple solution. Truth decay is just too complex, it's too pervasive for that. There's going to have to be changes on both sides of the information exchange. And by that I mean on one side there will almost certainly have to be changes in the way that information is provided by government, by journalists, by social media companies, even researchers. There may need to be changes in how information providers are incentivized, even regulated. On the other side of the exchange, America needs to improve its education systems to provide people with the skills and tools to distinguish fact from opinion, credible research from unreliable research, how to spot your own cognitive biases, how to reduce them or compensate for them, how to defend yourself against disinformation. It's what one of my colleagues calls better cognitive security. But here's the paradox of truth decay. Even while the power of facts and analysis is fading in some areas of public life, it's more prized than ever in others. In fields like energy, the military, medicine, agriculture, even baseball, facts and analysis are the coin of the realm. They drive decision-making. In business, facts and analysis drive profitability. Leaders in these fields understand that the accuracy of their information can and usually will determine their success or their failure. And so it's no wonder to me they're relying more and more on data, developing ever more sophisticated analytical tools to make sense of that data. Data is one of the most valuable commodities on the planet at the moment, except when it comes to political discourse and policymaking. But fortunately, as I speak out about truth decay, I'm finding that people understand this paradox. People understand that when solving public problems, facts matter, just as they do in every other walk of life. But if we're going to fight truth decay, it's going to have to be in the context of what civic responsibility means in the 21st century. What does it mean to be a responsible participant in the nation's democratic institutions and processes? What will it take to move people, young people, off the sidelines for them to feel they have a stake in their country's future? What will it take to reestablish civil discourse in a divided nation? These are prerequisites for building a society that is healthier, safer, more peaceful, and more secure. And that's why we're committed to fighting truth decay. And I hope you'll join us. Thank you.
All those insights and all the hard work that went into the research on which they were based. So now we'll have a conversation, and I have some questions from the audience. Please continue to send them in. So you have embarked, RAND has embarked on a rather complex area of research. It involves, and this is where RAND is wonderful, it involves in many disciplines, it's very interdisciplinary. You're looking at cognitive processing, you're looking at the information system, the educational system, the political system. So it's quite a project to have embarked upon. Was there a particular trigger, a particular point at which you and others at RAND said, hey, this is something RAND has to look at. It's just, this is too dire and too difficult. We've got to do some work on this.
Well, it's a good question. In 2005, I was asked to give a speech, and was the subject I was given was reflections on my career and what's changed in the public policy environment. Excuse me. I remember being a little taken aback by that request because I didn't think I, frankly, was old enough to reflect on my career at that stage. But, I realized I'd been at RAND 30 years at the time. And that the theme of that speech was the diminishing role of facts and analysis in public life. And for several years, I was concerned about what I was seeing in my work, but I have to confess I was concerned only from the standpoint of RAND. Our mission is to help decision makers make tough decisions and make tough choices on the basis of rational analysis. And I was worried if people weren't going to make decisions on that basis, it was a gloomy future for RAND. I later wised up and realized that, it had much greater ramifications. It was really only after I gave one of my typical hand-wringing speeches at a RAND event in 2016 that was about truth decay, that one of our donors came up to me, actually a group of them at a break, and said, I've been hearing you talk about this for many years now, and I thought he was leading up to a compliment. And he said, so, when are you and RAND going to do something about it? And that was the impetus for the book. We know we have not discovered something new. But what concerned me was that there was hand-wringing by me and a lot of other people. And I was hoping that we might be able to do something that would advance the discussion past the hand-wringing stage to the solution and response phase. And so we set out to posit a rigorous definition, a taxonomy of terms that people find in the book, a conceptual framework that identified the causes, the consequences, and the linkages among them. Some look back at history because I was being asked what was new about this. And then the final chapter in this book is essentially everything we don't know about the phenomenon but need to know to fight it. And that's the agenda we're following.
Mm-hmm. We'll get back to some of the dimensions of truth decay, but I found it interesting that you did say in your talk that you didn't think the phenomenon would ameliorate on its own. It wouldn't get better on its own. But when you looked back to those three previous periods of time, the situation did improve, and some of the factors that you identified as improving the situation were a revival of fact-based journalism, more transparent and acceptable government policies, a decrease in social and political turmoil, and perhaps just a natural end to a certain cycle. Do you think any of those factors will come into play on their own, or indeed will it not heal itself?
I think we're studying this more, analyzing it more, getting more people involved. I think all of them will need to be involved. I'm not certain what will be the stimulus to launch them and enable them to build. The economics of journalism has changed. The demand for that kind of journalism may have changed as well. We've got to ignite that. There's changes in government, obviously, and so I do think it's going to be harder, but those are going to be elements of the response, I believe.
Just focusing for a second on the areas where there's public perception that doesn't accord with facts. You mentioned a few, the vaccine controversy, the public views about increasing crime rates in the U.S. when crime rates are going down. And by the way, we see these controversies at the Commonwealth Club. We've had many debates about the vaccine controversy. And so I know it's touchy ground to identify what are some more others of these areas. In the book, you mentioned GMOs. You refer to climate change. I would add potentially, and again, this gets into very dangerous ground, I would add possibly creationism. What else is on the list?
Well, I think there's many that are. Another one we talk about is immigration. It matters to a formation of an immigration policy whether there's the net flow of immigrants is positive or negative. It's knowable what their contribution is to the economy, and you'd want policies to be based on the best available knowledge. There's always going to be professional judgment and other kinds of interpretation added to facts and analysis, but you hope that policymaking will start with facts and the scientific consensus.
You were talking about you referred to the possible regulation of information providers. And I think that makes us all wince a little bit, despite what we see in some of the most egregious of social media and blogging and so on. And so what do you mean by regulate information
I don't
providers?
necessarily mean government regulation. There's all sorts of examples of self-regulation, professional standards, and so on. I think one of the things we want to contribute is a more nuanced understanding of all the options available. Sometimes the discussion has been boiled down to a sort of a black and white choice, government regulation or nothing. There's actually many options in between, and we'll have a paper come out in a few months that will lay out the array of different options. But I think some professional standards and self-policing are probably going to be. I think we'll see that emerge.
Staying on the media for a moment, I'm very aware of our good friend who's the president of Northern California Public Broadcasting sitting in the front row here. And what do you think about public media? Is public media in a different category in terms of sticking with the facts and continuing to edit and filter with a high standard for facts?
Well, I'm a consumer of public media, both television and radio, but it doesn't garner a large enough share of the market to have a big effect yet on these trends.
Although I don't know the statistics offhand, but in fact, public media in Northern California is very high in terms of listenership and viewership. We're fortunate in that regard here. Many questions from the audience, and let me just pose a few of those. What are the social, political, and economic consequences if truth decay continues to get worse? What's the worst case?
Well, you just have to imagine dysfunction. I think, one of the differences another difference between this current era and some of the historical ones is the stakes are so much higher. If you policymakers miss a contagion today, it has the potential to spread around the world very rapidly. That wasn't the case in many of those earlier periods. If you misjudge an enemy threat, an adversary, the consequences are much more lethal and destructive than they had been in earlier times. And so the dysfunction, the possibilities of mistakes, and then I think the greatest, my greatest fear is the public disengagement from the process. It's hard to imagine how we can have a successful democracy with rates of participation as low as they are in certain of these instances.
I think we also increase the price for taking action for political actors when, for instance, they may be attacked because of their position on climate change in an environment where many of their constituents consider it debatable whether there's climate change, human-caused climate change, and so on. So it decreases the viability of action, I think, by political actors. This question of media and how to make sure that one finds the facts through media. What advice do you have for media consumers to sift out true facts? Any advice for media bosses regarding coverage of politicians? So, in other words, what are the filters that an individual can look for and that media should be enforcing upon itself to ensure factual basis?
Well, I think the media has contributed, not necessarily the main contributor to, and now, of course, when you any of us use a term like media, we're describing a enormously large array of organizations, down to including individuals who have large followings and so on, and are distributing information. Some of it accurate, a lot of it not accurate, much of it opinion. And this blurring of the line between fact and opinion is I think, obviously it's one of the trends that we've identified as constituting truth decay, and it's something that I think the major media companies and the professional journalism organizations need to address.
You talk about people being able to recognize their own cognitive biases. Now, this is obviously one of the points of higher education, for example, in fields like political science and the social sciences in general, teaching research skills and analytical approach to factoring out one's own bias. But in the educational system more generally, how do we create a system which teaches recognition of one's own cognitive biases?
Invite me back in a few years. I hope to have an answer to that.
That's a deal.
And I hope other people work on that as well. I don't have an answer right now to that, but there are experiments that have been done that show that people can be trained to recognize and compensate for cognitive biases. How to scale that up and make it a regular part of our instruction is, I think, the big question.
You point out the dangers of our increasing association with people of like mind. So someone wants to know, is it wrong to associate with like-minded people? Should we be actively looking to socialize with people of differing beliefs? And how do you do that?
Well, I think it's easier to do now to limit yourselves. It's a personal choice, but the internet has made it easier now to do that, and some of the micro casting, if you will, in some social media platforms enable you to just engage with people who are like-minded. It's valuable, especially on areas where there isn't certainty, where there aren't confirmable facts, to see different and experience different interpretations. But now, of course, geographically, geographic areas are relatively more homogeneous than they've been before. Of course, some politicians have contributed to that through gerrymandering and other techniques. So there's a lot working against someone who has a desire to expose themselves to multiple perspectives. But I think on the most complex problems, it's valuable.
We like to think that here at the club, we encourage that. And so I know many Commonwealth Club members who come to a program with Madeline Albright and follow it by a program with Sean Spicer.
Yeah.
And so we cultivate that attitude. I think this is one of the key organizations in our area that actively
Absolutely. No,
pushes that. How do you ensure that you're exposed to multiple viewpoints?
You know, it's a really good question. I don't know if you were asking it personally or asking it sort of in general. But
Both.
I think one of the, I've been reflecting recently, if I had asked my father, what should I do to be a responsible citizen? He's likely to have said, I ought to watch the nightly, one of the 3 nightly news channels. And one of the things I'd like to see an answer to is what's the modern version of an answer to that question. It's not going to be the same as it was when we were growing up. And I think it's very challenging to ensure that you're getting exposure to sound information, but from multiple perspectives.
We depend on, again, the educational system to expose children to a variety of views and so on. But in the book, you talk about the pressures against that in terms of standardized testing and meeting high levels of requirements that really don't have to do with teaching analytical capabilities.
Right.
What can be done about that?
Well, the first is to recognize the importance of distinguishing fact from opinion, fact from erroneous information. I think importantly, we're going to have to teach make sure more people are familiar with the scientific method and how progress of scientific knowledge is accumulated in order to make progress. In this era of big data, there should be an emphasis on understanding statistics, not necessarily performing it, but being able to detect misleading statistics. And I think one of the challenges will be reprioritizing a concept of the skills and tools needed given the dramatic changes in the information landscape. It would be coincidental in the extreme if the very way we were taught in the pre-internet age, the pre-social media age, was still appropriate for modern times.
Out in the environment, who's doing a good job here to combat these trends? You mentioned Sandra Day O'Connor's organization, iCivics. Could you talk a little bit about that? And who else is doing a good job?
We have it's now, the book is a year old from when it's written. It was published in January, so I know I won't do a very, very good job, but the book does have a dozen or so. And there are some other, I think, important initiatives. I know that Daniel Stidd is here from the Hewlett Foundation, and the Madison Initiative is a outstanding, very fundamentally important initiative that is not the only one, but one of the prominent ones to.
And say a word about that.
Develop. Well, I ought to let him speak for himself, but it's a exploration and a stimulus to get more thinking and action to revitalize the essence of the democratic institutions and processes in America. And I'm hoping that is both a leader, but also one that's going to generate a lot of followers.
Back to you, though, when you consume information, how do you personally ensure that you get a wide variety and you cross-check information?
Well, it helps to work at RAND.
Yes,
Because
I recall that.
I'm lucky enough. I've got 2,000 colleagues. They come from every single academic discipline and professional specialty all over the world, different backgrounds and so on. So I'm exposed quite a bit. But I have my favorite aggregator news sites. Try to read as much as I can. And be mindful that there's always multiple perspectives on questions. But what we like to do is we start with the facts, and that's, I think, the first principle.
Yes, I remember the nature of RAND. I came there at age 23, right out of graduate school, and you went down the halls and you could knock on doors and ask any question you had about China, about Russia, about weapons, about water policy in the Netherlands, and there was an expert behind each door who could answer any of your questions. Kind of like an intellectual candy store.
Sure is.
There are a number of personal questions. How can I, as an individual, fight truth decay in personal conversations? Cognitive biases are so strong, and facts aren't enough to convince many people.
Yeah, some of the research that I'm aware of, I think underscores the importance of having the message, a contrary message, come from somebody for whom a person is already familiar with. Mm-hmm. And identifying those kinds of people who can intervene in a conversation is obviously very challenging. So this is, I think, one of many, many really tough questions that it's going to take a while to unravel, and I wish I had better answers for you on that.
I know that this work is a research agenda, and there's much yet to do. Another person wants to know, how can we deal with the daily barrage of lies and untruths? I find that I just want to turn off and become less and less involved, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. Well, ultimately, some people, when I wrote an article for the Pittsburgh newspaper about the contrast between baseball and politics, where baseball is increasingly dependent on data and analytics and so on. Politics, not winning elections, but making policy seem to be going the other direction. And somebody said, well, in baseball, you win or you lose. And that isn't necessarily the case in politics and in governing, but it could be. And so one of the reasons I've begun to focus on civic engagement, participation in the electoral process, is that's the way to hold decision makers accountable, is through the electoral process. And it's really up to the citizens to demand that policy problems in the public sector be solved the same way that difficult decisions are made in private life. And I don't think that's too much to ask, but we citizens haven't been demanding that. That's the paradox, I think, is we, in many other walks of life that we participate in when we're working, and many of our personal decisions, we look for facts, we insist on facts. We need to hold our public officials accountable for the same approach to problem solving.
So, stepping back for just a second, I recall that one of our board members who I saw at lunch today asked me to ask you just to describe RAND and what it does and what it does in today's world.
Well, RAND is I think, truly a unique institution. I don't mean that as distinctive. I mean really one of a kind. It's a combination of a consultancy. So much of our work is commissioned by senior government decision makers, every single federal department, many state and local governments, foreign governments, and so on. But we believe in publishing research. That's important for a number of different reasons. And so we're not just a consultancy, we're almost like a think tank. We're often called a think tank. We publish almost 1,000 titles every year. So in addition to serving a client, we believe we have to serve a public and won't accept a contract if it puts any constraints on our ability to publish. And then we have this huge graduate school as well. So it's a combination of a consultancy, a think tank, and a university. Nonprofit, nonpartisan. We're lucky to be underwritten not only by clients and grantors, but individual donors as well. And that gives us the flexibility and the freedom to address questions that are either too long range for typical clients, government agencies, maybe too controversial. We've recently waded in a big way to the question of gun policy. There's a very weak evidentiary base for making decisions in that area. We're trying to fill that. Truth Decay obviously is an example. It's a kind of an orphaned project. We were able to do it with philanthropic support. We're now embarking on a major assault on the opioid crisis. We've been long have tremendous research on the health system, actually the subsystem, the overall ecosystem of this crisis. And we've got, I think, our arms around that. But that's only a piece of the crisis, and there's a number of other parts of society that's affected, whether it be the child welfare system, the court system, the education system. And we're now committed to getting our arms around the entire ecosystem and not just that. So a lot of exciting work, but we've got a great client base, and maybe the highlight from this year of our work for our clients is we had the opportunity to develop the recovery plan, reconstruction plan for the island of Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. And that was a great opportunity for us. The governor, Rossello, has delivered the plan based on our analysis to the Congress in August. There are a little more than 3.5 million people live on the island, and 4 million visit every year. So it's, for us, a rare opportunity to affect the lives of millions and millions of people. The underlying analysis that went into the needs assessment will be published by RAND this fall, and we'll have an opportunity now to help the government with planning the investments that will be made in the island. So a lot of exciting work.
And the clients range from who to who?
Well, I'll give you a breakdown. About 80% of our work is for governments, and that includes the United States federal government, but also state, local, and then some foreign governments. We work for numerous philanthropic foundations, as well as international organizations like the World Bank. And then we have, of course, our cherished individual donors. The largest clients are the Department of Defense, the Department of Health and Human Services. The largest of our foreign clients, United Kingdom, Australia, European Union.
Back to many audience questions, interesting ones. How can the general public obtain copies of your reports?
Well, you can buy them on Amazon, but I wouldn't recommend it. I would download it for free from our website. That's how I do it. So, yeah.
Truth Decay, right here. This
So
is the book form.
It came out, Gloria, I must say, it came out longer than we had intended it to, but it's very, very well documented. But there's a 4-page version, a 3-minute video, a 10-minute video, and a center at Harvard did about a 10-page summary. I thought was outstanding, and so that's one as well.
Right. Back to Truth Decay. How valid are online fact-checking organizations?
I think some are good. One won a Pulitzer Prize, PolitiFact. Some not so good. We don't take any stand about evaluating them, but I think the good ones perform a useful service, and I think it'd be worthwhile for interested members of the audience to check PolitiFact from time to time. I think you will be amazed at how our politicians of both parties fare when their statements are checked.
Sounds interesting.
Sobering.
Is this Truth Decay a U.S. problem, or is it happening everywhere, and why or why not?
We had this year the 10th anniversary of our office in Brussels, and there was a big event. It was about Truth Decay, and I spoke about the problems in the United States, and the attitude of the other panelists was essentially, boy, thank God we're onto this so that it doesn't come here. Of course, it's there. And we had originally intended this book to have a global reach. We did much of the research for that, but it was already getting too long. And we hope now to have one of our follow-on volumes address the same kinds of issues in Western Europe, but it's not solely an American phenomenon.
I noted with interest a comment in the book about in Europe, the spread of fake news or libelous content is illegal. And so where and how? And is it simply libelous material, or is it non-factual material
Well,
that's
it
illegal?
varies by country, and in fact, that's one of the real opportunities I think we have. There's no first, we have here in this country, obviously, the First Amendment, which is an important set of protections, but it doesn't exist in other countries. And so I think studying what some of the policy levers that have been attempted and will be attempted in other countries, I think will be quite useful, not because we will be able to replicate them, but they'll give us insight into things that we might be able to do here.
That gets to the next question. How do we balance free speech with gatekeeping of non-fact-based or fake views on popular social platforms, media, or policy debates? We would like to address that question. I don't think that's one that can have an answer, but I think we can, with others, move towards a framework for thinking about how to balance those considerations. Are national policymakers as affected by misinformation or disinformation as the U.S. populace is? If so, can this be remedied? I think the question is trying to get at, is there a differential? Are there those who maybe have access to accurate information but are a little manipulative in using it? Is there a differential access?
Well, I think everybody is familiar with statistics about, how many of our congressional seats are safe or relatively safe, and so it's hard to hold a decision maker accountable when you have that kind of situation. We do obviously have changes in control of houses of Congress. We may have a change in one or both, coming up. But I think that's one of the things that makes this current environment so troubling to me. When there isn't agreement on basic facts, you set yourself up for dramatic oscillations in policy responses. So what we're concerned about is a series of repeal and replace responses as the houses of Congress change. And that's just not the way a private business approaches complex problems, and it's not going to be a recipe for success given the problems this country faces.
For me, it seems that truth, and this is me, someone in the audience, it seems that truth decay is trumped by priorities decay. Words like truth and priorities are important, but which is at the top of the knowledge pyramid?
Well, not sure I understand the question. I should say something about the just this term. I learned as we were doing this research that there's an enormous volume of writings, important writings that get at the question of, is there truth and can truth be known? Is there absolute truth? And we do not attempt to enter into that debate. By truth, we mean verifiable facts and analytical interpretations of data. The reason I like the term truth decay is that it describes a process, and if we're going to fight it and turn it back and reverse it, we're going to have to understand how it got started and how it picked up speed, resisted efforts to stop it. And so it's not a perfect term, but and we're not at RAND known for our good titles, but we seem to have hit on one that's memorable here.
It is a very intuitively understandable and popularizable term. Getting back to the educational system, what can educators do to combat truth decay? An individual teacher, individual educators.
Yeah, I'll tell you one of the first things. I've spoken actually to a lot of groups of educators, and I'm now going to rely on some of the suggestions that made to me in those groups. One is teaching the difference between a fact and an opinion. And I was told by somebody in an audience once that they remember in Evanston, Illinois, being actually taught, being given Time magazine and Life magazine and so on, and asked to circle facts and underline opinions. And I've found very few people who remember that kind of exercise in their education. That, of course, can be automated now and so on, but that is a very basic skill that in my mind, increasingly important for every American to have.
We have a trend currently with tech moguls buying traditional media. You mentioned Time Magazine. Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post, and Mark Benioff just bought Time Magazine. Do you see this as a positive trend? What have you seen from the Post since it entered the Bezos
Well,
era?
we're about to, we're embarking on that experience in Los Angeles, near where RAND is headquartered, where Patrick Soon-Shiong has bought the Los Angeles Times. Some people have drawn some historical parallels to robber barons and other, wealthy individuals in earlier periods, Hearst and Pulitzer and so on. That may not be a good comparison. I think many of them seem on the surface to be very well-meaning, and if individual largesse is able to improve the economics of fact-based journalism, transparency, investigative journalism, I think that's a very, very positive development.
Tell us a little more about the LA Times. Didn't, in fact, you have a robber baron who stripped out a lot of the value and laid off a lot of people at the Times? And
Well, like a lot of newspapers, it's lost its advertising base, and it's an extremely difficult market to serve geographically. Los Angeles is so spread out and so on. So I'm not sure its fortunes have been, evolution has been much different than major metropolitan newspapers in other areas. Mm-hmm. But I think there's high hopes that the investments that Patrick Soon-Shiong will make will restore not only the manpower, but also the journalistic standards of the paper.
We at the club used to have partnerships with several newspapers where our speakers wrote op-ed columns, or there was reporting on, sometimes through direct articles, on things that were being said at the club and so on. That has pretty much passed away. Does RAND have any media partnerships, any outlets in the traditional media for its fact-based research?
Well, we published maybe 400 or 500 commentaries in many, many newspapers over the years, over a typical year. But we're finding it somewhat more difficult to place op-eds because, the typical RAND one is what we call an explainer. It's usually describing the way to think about it, how to think about a problem rather than what to think. And we see the pressures that journalists are under. We're told often to make the pieces more personal, to attack a person holding a policy position as opposed to the poly itself, which we don't do. And so sometimes our work isn't quite as pointed and as maybe spicy as some editors would want.
I will say again, we do have at the club a great partnership with public radio and public media where we broadcast our programs throughout the country. So once again, that remains a stronghold of at least our fact-based or informed opinion-based output here at the club.
One of the things that the public media, of course, has not dropped is the long-form journalism, the ability to go into depth in stories. So, we're usually very gratified when National Public Radio or one of the public broadcasting stations zeroes in on a RAND report because we're going to get deep treatment rather than a quick hit.
You cited those disturbing statistics on voter turnout. What's your elevator pitch for convincing a never-voting millennial to vote for the first time?
That's I don't know how good I am at communicating with millennials. Here I am, I'm in my 5th decade of my employer, and I'm sure that seems bizarre to a millennial. It's a basic, maybe the most fundamental responsibility of citizenship. And to be a good citizen, you have to participate, in my view. So
out of the agenda for research ahead, what do you consider the most important research topic that RAND will address in this area of truth decay, and how are you going to approach it?
Well, we have literally dozens, literally dozens in chapter 6 of this book, and we won't be able to do it all ourselves. We won't be able to finance all of it ourselves. I'm hoping we'll get help doing that. But I'm curious of it. We're doing quite a bit of research on how people make decisions, what gets people to change their mind. I'm very interested in this research we're doing about how the news has changed over the years. I'll tell you how we got started on that. The chairman of our board of trustees is a former journalist, Karen Elliott House, and
Wall Street
at
Journal.
Wall Street Journal. She was editor and first a foreign correspondent, and then a columnist, editor, and a publisher. And she was commenting that newspapers that she had seen, she didn't name any, seemed to have headlines that didn't always match the content of the story. They were trying to attract, be maybe a little bit more provocative. The opening paragraphs were different. And we think we may have a technique for actually detecting and measuring that. We don't know if it'll work, but we want to see if it does work. I described a few of the other examples that we have, and we'll have the next wave. The book is the first word on the subject. We'll have the next wave of our publications begin to emerge towards the end of this calendar year, with more coming in the spring. So we're really committed to doing what we can to illuminate the causes and consequences and stimulating an attack on the constituent parts of this problem. It's very serious.
We appreciate the work you're doing, and we hope it gets widespread public exposure.
Well, thank you for helping with that.
Of course. And so we're at the end of our time now, unfortunately. Please join me in thanking Michael Rich, President and CEO of the RAND Corporation.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you. We thank all of you here at the Commonwealth Club, as well as our audience on radio, television, and the internet. We want to remind everyone that you can read the RAND report on truth decay by visiting rand.org. I'm Gloria Duffy, and now this meeting of the Commonwealth Club is adjourned.